We all know a fair share of commercial bombs of any industry. A show can get very low ratings, a movie can perform way below the budget, or just other products in general fail to make a profit. But what about video games? Especially with the industry being in the shape that it's in now, we've been seeing games bomb a lot. And I'm keeping this to AAA bombs. Obviously, there are many AA games and indie games that don't do so well, but they rarely, if ever, have the backing of a big AAA studio. In addition to it being AAA bombs, it has to be commercial failures. There is such a thing as like a critical bomb, but they could still sell very well. This is a list of games, good or bad, mostly bad, but they just refuse to turn a profit for whatever reason in whatever circumstances. Anyways, let's get into this. This is the top 10 biggest AAA bombs in gaming. But before we get started, you know what to do. If you like this video, subscribe if you're new, hit the bell, leave a comment, or I'll drop bombs on you.
I wanted to give to you, in the last part of your notes here, the significance spiritually of the number 10 in the Bible.
So imagine you are a gaming studio and you have been given the license to make a Lord of the Rings game, and more specifically, a game centered around a specific character from the franchise. And you have so many options to choose from, so you pick Gollum. Alright, now questionable choice aside, I guess a stealth game starring Gollum is intriguing, but when we got the Lord of the Rings Gollum, I think everyone as a collective asked, why? Because I'll tell you what, playing the game does not answer that question. Lord of the Rings Gollum was a buggy and glitchy slog of a game, and sometimes you can have fun with a broken game, but not this one. With outdated game design, frustrating and unresponsive controls, and at best, a questionable idea to begin with, this ended up losing Daedalic $15 million, and they were forced to shut down their development team and cancel the sequel. And yes, they were working on a sequel to the Lord of the Rings Gollum. And to make matters even worse, they put out a statement, apologizing for the game, but it was written by ChatGPT. Wow. I understand we are all tired of live service hero shooters and battle royales, but go back to like 2016 to 2018, where hero shooters like Overwatch and battle royales like Fortnite were all the rage. But in 2017, a developer known as Boss Key Productions made a game called Lawbreakers, and Nexon published it as an online multiplayer 5v5 first-person shooter. And that was it. It came out and the servers were like immediately a ghost town. But then, the very next year, in 2018, another game by Boss Key Productions, this time self-publishing a game called Radical Heights, released as a battle royale similar to Fortnite and PUBG, and just like Lawbreakers, nobody played it. Call this cheating, but I'm throwing in both Lawbreakers and Radical Heights, as they both had the same developer, both had very few players, both got shut down not too long afterwards, and both games led to the closures of Boss Key Productions. Def Jam is a pretty cool series of games that has kind of just been dead for a while. It was a bunch of fighting games, really more like wrestling games if you want to be annoying, but they were games where you play as characters that are based on and voiced by popular hip-hop rappers. Unlike the other more popular Def Jam games though, Def Jam Rap Star was a rap-themed karaoke game where you sing along to many rap songs. The problem here, though, and why it's on the list, is because, and I kid you not, the developers did not have the rights to the songs in the game. This caused a major lawsuit against developer 4MM, and they really had no legal leg to stand on. They were in the undisputed wrong. This lawsuit, along with the low sales of the game, caused 4MM to shut down and close the community site for Def Jam Rap Star. I highly doubt anything like this will ever happen again in the industry, because this is a very specific and honestly easily avoidable instance that I'm sure most companies will avoid. But just think about that. That is insane.
36.
Very close, but that's not it. Let's go to Gary the Retard. What number between 2 and 4?
7.
Rocksteady, a well-beloved developer, obviously best known for the Batman Arkham games, that gave us hands down some of the best superhero game action, compelling stories, and a combat system that games are still trying to replicate to this day. And for years after the conclusion of the Arkham series, people have been clamoring for Rocksteady to tackle like another DC license, and they eventually tackled Suicide Squad with Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. But the problem is, they made it a live service game. I think I speak for most people when I say that the wider gaming audience is just over the live service game. We've seen time and time again that these types of games, with some rare exceptions, not only are they just not doing it for people, people just don't care. We'll see that later. And it shows because as of last August, Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League resulted in a $200 million loss and many layoffs within Rocksteady. The saddest thing here, though, is that a single-player story-driven Suicide Squad game developed by Rocksteady, I think actually had a lot of potential, but the greedy suits decided to tap into a market that is just not working anymore.
Okay, Mrs. Puff, what's my final score?
6.
Woo! Babylon's Fall. More like Babylon's Fall Off immediately. I couldn't really think of a segue for this one. Babylon's Fall launched in March of 2022, and at launch had an all-time high of 1,188 players on Steam. Now that is embarrassingly low, to the point where eventually the all-time low was a total of 1. At one point there was one fucking person playing Babylon's Fall. This led to Babylon's Fall getting delisted, pennied out in stores, or physical copies reportedly just getting destroyed, and eventually the servers shut down, all in the span of a few months. The game was completely dead and buried in less than a year after its launch, not to mention this nearly bankrupted developer, Platinum Games. Although being shut down in less than a year might not seem as crazy due to recent events, when this happened, it was almost like a lesson that the industry should have learned, but they still haven't.
Oh, chills. Literal chills.
It was number 5. Number 5 killed my brother.
Oh my god, I forgot about that.
Every game on this list I've covered so far is either a bad game or a game that nobody really has much of an opinion on. Shenmue, however, is a critically acclaimed title that many people will tell you is one of the greatest games of all time, but when it launched, it almost killed Sega. Keep in mind, Sega was coming off the sales disaster that was the Sega Saturn, but the Sega Dreamcast was meant to be a course correction. It had a strong lineup of games, it was really ahead of its time with online functionality and whatnot, and was also very powerful on a technical aspect. But it just wasn't selling well enough, whether it be the fact that the PS2 had come out and it had a DVD player and the Dreamcast didn't, or people just lost trust in Sega. Now, what does that have to do with Shenmue? Well, Shenmue was a major title for the Dreamcast and was shaping up to be a legitimate system seller. However, the game ended up going over budget. Shenmue might be one of the most expensive games ever, especially when you adjust for inflation. So when it launched on a struggling console, even if the game got critical acclaim, it didn't do enough to make back its budget, leading it to be a substantial commercial flop and possibly being one of the final straws that led Sega to discontinue the Dreamcast and leave the console wars for good. Goes to show that even games as good as Shenmue can still end up on lists like this. John Romero. For a while, one of the most revered game designers of all time, best known for bringing us games like Doom, Wolfenstein, and Quake, amongst others. However, he was behind a brand new first-person shooter titled Daikatana, which was meant to be big. It was John Romero starting his own company, Ion Storm, and had a $40 million development, which might seem fairly low for, video game budgets today, but back in 2000, that was pretty high. However, somehow, in an effort to force the game out quickly, Daikatana managed to face multiple delays to the point where it came out and fell behind its competitors. And despite multiple delays, it also somehow managed to release buggy and glitchy. All of this made it very difficult for Daikatana to make back its budget, and it ended up being a flop on an, at the time, unforeseen level. If you have a game that starts development in the year 1997 and ends up releasing in 2011, the game better be nothing short of an unimaginable success. But Duke Nukem Forever is on this list, so yeah. The irony in that name, by the way, is perfect. But Duke Nukem Forever spent 15 years in development. Within that 15-year time span, the game changed engines multiple times, the game switched developers, while the publisher published other games, and once it came out in 2011, Duke Nukem Forever was very dated with its humor, tone, and even gameplay. And after 15 years in development, the game fell very short of sales expectations, and the whole thing ended up being a major flop. 15 years in development is crazy, although fun fact, Beyond Good and Evil 2 has actually beaten that development time, but still, Duke Nukem Forever ended up selling under 1 million. Sure, many of the other games on this list might have lost more money, or might have even fallen flatter upon release, but the development alone should put Duke Nukem Forever on this list.
What kind of pencil do we take again?
Number 2. Take a number 2.
Looks like you took a big number 2.
For this next one, we're gonna go way back to 1983. Video games as a medium and industry was in its infancy, and one major flop was the death certificate for the entire industry. But it wasn't so much one major flop, it was Atari not having any worthy competitors, and there was an oversaturation of shitty video games, and it all came crashing down, literally, with E.T. for the Atari 2600. While, like I said, not the sole perpetrator for the video game crash of 1983, E.T. was more the straw that broke the camel's back. As a game, right now, it's ultimately inoffensive, but for the time, it was pretty rough. But that's not why it's considered the flop it is. It's considered a flop because of how many copies of the game that Atari produced, and because the game was received so poorly at the time, many people who bought copies of the game returned it, and Atari ended up with so many unsold or returned copies that they dumped it all in a landfill. This led to E.T. becoming such a big flop, the gaming industry crashed. Atari basically shut down, and retailers along with the general public did not want anything to do with video games until Nintendo eventually rose from the ashes with the NES. Now that is history.
I'm a Luigi, number 1.
Now you probably think, DPX, how does a game that is largely credited for the crash of the video game industry not come at number 1? Well, like I said earlier, E.T. came out when the industry was still in its infancy. But fast forward over 40 years later to the year 2024, the gaming industry is not only so much bigger, it's bigger than any other industry in terms of revenue. So I don't think any game coming out will lead to a crash quite like the one in 1983. But we do have other problems, like maybe a live service hero shooter being in development for 8 years with a $100 million budget thrown into it, only for it to come out and fall way behind its competitors and leading the game to get completely deleted only 2 weeks after release. Yeah, that's right, I'm talking about Concord. Maybe it's recency bias, but in terms of budget, development, and all that, Concord is without a doubt the biggest commercial flop in gaming history. And it didn't even come out a full month ago. Like I said, Concord comes out to compete with games like Overwatch while adding nothing new yet costing $40, comes out with a peak player count of under 700 players and estimated to have sold a total of 25,000 units, and then gets shut down, delisted, pulled from store shelves, and refunded all in the span of 2 weeks. This is unprecedented. A huge miscalculation on Sony's part, investing $100 million into this when the writing was on the wall immediately. So with that being said, Concord is without question the biggest commercial failure in AAA gaming. So that was this list. I hope this video does not become a commercial failure. Well, be sure to like this video, come subscribe, or I will drop some bombs on you.